The ancient structure had floated in empty space for longer than most civilizations had existed. Dr. Rachel Ward pressed her hand against the observation window, watching the crystalline mass drift past. It looked like frozen lightning, all sharp angles and impossible curves that hurt to look at for too long. 17 different alien species had tried to open it. All of them had failed. "You're wasting your time," Commander Pierce said behind her. "The Drayan brought their best mathematicians. The aliens tried for 200 years. What makes you think a human can do what they couldn't?" Rachel didn't turn around. She'd heard variations of this speech every day for the past 3 months. The other species saw humans as children playing with adult toys. Humanity had only achieved faster than light travel 50 years ago. Most of the galactic community had been traveling between stars for millennia. "Maybe that's exactly why I can do it," Rachel said. "Fresh eyes see fresh patterns." Pierce snorted and left the observation deck. Rachel heard his footsteps fade down the corridor. She pulled out her tablet and compared the new photographs she'd taken with the thousands already in her database. The archive's surface was covered in what everyone assumed was decoration. Swirls and geometric shapes that seemed random. Beautiful but meaningless, except Rachel didn't believe in meaningless decoration. Not on something this important. The archive sat at the intersection of 3 major empires. It had been here when all of them were still learning to make fire. Someone had built it to last, had placed it where it couldn't be ignored. "You didn't do that for art." She zoomed in on a section near what might be an entrance. The pattern repeated every 47 centimeters. Inside that repetition, smaller patterns emerged. She'd noticed it 2 weeks ago but hadn't been able to figure out what it meant. The shapes themselves weren't letters or numbers. They didn't match any known language, human or alien. But what if they weren't meant to be read like language? What if they were something else? Rachel pulled up her quantum mechanics files. She'd studied quantum probability in college back before she'd switched to linguistics. The field had always fascinated her because it was fundamentally about pattern and possibility. Reality itself was just collapsed probability waves. She stared at the swirls on the archive's surface. Then she looked at the probability distribution graphs on her screen. Her heart started beating faster. The patterns matched. Not perfectly, but close enough. The swirls represented quantum states. The geometric shapes showed how they collapsed. It wasn't decoration. It was math. Advanced math that represented reality at its most basic level. Rachel worked through the night. She converted the patterns into equations, then the equations into a sequence. It took 19 hours before she had something that might work. A mathematical phrase that expressed a simple concept. We seek to understand. The next morning, she took a shuttle to the archive itself. The structure was massive up close, easily 3 kilometers across. Her shuttle looked like a toy next to it. The pilot positioned them near the section Rachel had been studying. "What exactly are you planning to do?" the pilot asked. "Talk to it," Rachel said. She activated her suit's external speakers and transmitted her mathematical sequence as a series of sound waves, different frequencies for different values, following the pattern she'd decoded from the surface. It sounded like music, strange and atonal. Nothing happened. Rachel tried again, adjusting the frequencies. Still nothing. She was about to try a 3rd time when the archive responded, a low harmonic pulse that rattled her bones even through the suit. The crystalline surface began to glow, faint at first, then brighter. Lines of light traced the patterns she'd been studying, spreading outward like veins. "Are you seeing this?" Rachel whispered. The pilot was already shouting into the comm system, calling the research ship. Within minutes, every sensor they had was pointed at the archive. The glow intensified. Sections of the surface that had been opaque for nearly 1,000,000 years became transparent. Rachel could see inside now, chambers and corridors that went deeper than seemed possible. Then the sound came again, but this time it was different, structured, rhythmic. The archive wasn't just responding, it was speaking. Rachel scrambled to record everything, her hands shaking as she worked. The mathematical language she'd discovered was just the key. The real language was far more complex, but she could learn it. She knew she could. The transmission lasted 17 minutes before fading. The glow dimmed but didn't disappear completely. The archive had been silent for 847,000 years. Now it was waiting for Rachel to understand what it was trying to say. Back on the research ship, the crew celebrated. They'd made history. Humanity had succeeded where every other species had failed, but Rachel barely noticed the excitement around her. She was already working on translating the archive's message, pulling apart each harmonic pattern, searching for meaning. She didn't know yet that the message was a warning. She didn't know that the archive had been built specifically to wait for someone like her, someone human, and she definitely didn't know that everything the archive wanted to tell her was about humanity itself. All she knew was that after nearly 1,000,000 years, the galaxy's oldest structure had finally found someone who could hear it speak. 3 weeks of constant work had left Rachel exhausted. Her quarters smelled like recycled air and too many protein bars. She'd barely slept, spending every hour breaking down the archive's harmonics into mathematical expressions, then those expressions into something resembling language. The process was like learning to see in a new color. Her brain hurt from the effort. The breakthrough came during what should have been a rest period. Rachel was lying on her bunk, half asleep, when her mind made a connection it hadn't made while she was actively trying. The archive wasn't using one language, it was using 7 simultaneously, layered on top of each other. Each harmonic frequency carried different information. Together they created something far more complex than the sum of their parts. She practically fell out of bed reaching for her tablet. Within an hour, she had a working translation matrix. It was rough and incomplete, but it worked. The archive's first message resolved into actual words on her screen. First seal broken. Seeker identified. Beginning data transfer. Rachel's hands trembled as she transmitted a response using the same layered harmonic pattern. Ready to receive. What happened next would later be called the cascade. The archive opened. Not physically, but informationally. Data poured into the research ship's computers faster than they could process it. Star charts showing galaxies humanity had never seen. Biological databases containing genetic information for thousands of species. Technological blueprints for devices that seemed impossible. Mathematical proofs that solved problems human scientists hadn't even thought to ask yet. It was overwhelming. Beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Rachel watched the data flow across her screens, trying to categorize it. Most of it would take years to fully understand. But some things were immediately clear. The archive wasn't just a library. It was a memorial. Section after section detailed extinct civilizations, not just their names and locations, but everything about them, their art, their science, their philosophies. Complete records of peoples who no longer existed. 217 dead civilizations, all meticulously documented, all gone. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session within 48 hours. Rachel found herself standing in a chamber designed for beings much larger than humans. The representatives of 17 species watched her from their various seats and platforms. Some looked curious. Others looked afraid. A few looked angry. "You have opened something that was sealed for a reason," the Drayan representative said. Its voice came through a translator as a series of clicks and whistles. "Many have tried to access the archive. All failed. Why do you succeed?" "I don't know," Rachel admitted. "I found a mathematical pattern in the surface structure. I used it to communicate." The archive responded. "Show us this pattern," the Ilian representative demanded. Rachel did. She showed them everything. The quantum probability distributions, the layered harmonics, the translation matrix she'd developed. Several species immediately tried to replicate her work. Their best linguists and mathematicians attempted to send messages to the archive using Rachel's methods. Nothing happened. The archive remained open, data still flowing, but it only responded to Rachel. When she transmitted, it answered. When anyone else tried, silence. "It has chosen you," an old Torvan scholar said. "Or perhaps it has chosen your species." That possibility made several representatives very uncomfortable. Humanity was too young, too untested to be trusted with something this important. But there was nothing anyone could do about it. The archive had made its decision. Rachel returned to her work, but now with observers. Scientists from a dozen species crowded into the research ship, watching her every move. She tried to ignore them as she went deeper into the archive systems. The more she translated, the more she realized the archive wasn't just storing data. It was alive. Not biological life, but something like consciousness existed within its crystalline structure. "Are you aware?" she transmitted one night alone in her quarters. The response came faster than usual. "Awareness is difficult concept. I maintain. I remember, I wait. Purpose drives existence, and what is your purpose? To warn, to teach, to remember the dead so their mistakes need not repeat." Rachel felt cold despite the ship's climate control. "What mistakes?" Too much to show in simple words. You must see. You must understand context. Continue translation. Unlock deeper levels. Then you will know. Over the following days, Rachel worked to access those deeper levels. The archive taught her as she went, introducing new harmonic layers, new mathematical concepts. It was like the structure itself was evaluating her, testing whether she could handle what it wanted to share. She found references scattered throughout the database. Mentions of something called the catalyst species. The words appeared in warning texts, in historical records, in what looked like emergency broadcasts from long-dead civilizations. Always with the same tone of fear and urgency. Beware the catalyst. They return. Stop them before threshold is reached. The warnings were incomplete, corrupted by time, or deliberately obscured. Rachel couldn't tell which, but they appeared too often to be coincidence. Whoever built the archive had been terrified of this catalyst species. Terrified enough to spend enormous resources warning future civilizations about them. She compiled every reference she could find and ran them through linguistic analysis. Patterns emerged. The catalyst species weren't conquerors or destroyers in the traditional sense. They didn't wage war or enslave others. They were dangerous in a different way. Something about their nature itself was the threat. Who were the catalyst species? Rachel asked the archive directly. The response was longer this time, more complex. Rachel's translation software struggled to keep up. But eventually the words formed. That is the question you must answer yourself. Continue deeper. The truth waits in the oldest files. But know this, I was built to warn of their return, and my sensors detect familiar patterns. The cycle approaches completion once more. Rachel stared at her screen long after the message faded. The cycle approaches completion. What cycle? And what did it have to do with anything happening now? She had a terrible feeling she was about to find out. The historical database took 5 days to properly access. Rachel had to learn 3 additional harmonic layers and solve what the archive called a compatibility test. The test turned out to be a series of ethical questions about knowledge and responsibility. Questions like whether some truths were too dangerous to know, whether individuals had the right to information that could harm civilizations, whether curiosity justified risk. Rachel answered honestly. She believed truth was better than ignorance, that people deserved to make informed choices, that knowledge itself wasn't evil, even if it could be used for evil purposes. The archive accepted her responses and opened the deepest levels of its memory. What she found there changed everything. The archive's records went back 3 million years. 3 million years of galactic history carefully documented. Rachel could trace the rise and fall of hundreds of civilizations across that vast time span. Some lasted thousands of years, others barely a few centuries. Each left their mark on the galaxy before fading into extinction. But there was a pattern. A terrible pattern that repeated itself again and again. Every 900,000 years something happened. Multiple civilizations across the galaxy would suddenly vanish within a short time frame. Not gradually declining, but disappearing almost overnight. Billions of beings simply gone. And then the galaxy would be quiet for thousands of years, like it was recovering from a wound. The pattern had repeated 3 times in the archive's memory. 3 great extinctions, each separated by roughly 900,000 years. The most recent was 847,000 years ago, right around the time the archive had gone silent. Rachel zoomed in on the extinction events, looking for causes. The records showed no signs of war or plague or natural disaster. The civilizations hadn't been destroyed. They'd just stopped existing. Their cities remained intact but empty. Their ships drifted without crews. Their technology continued functioning but with no one to use it. And throughout the records, wherever Rachel looked close to these extinction events, she found gaps. Deliberate deletions. Someone or something had removed information from the archive. Specific files were missing. Certain names had been erased. It was like watching a story with crucial pages torn out. The Galactic Council had ordered Rachel to stop her deep research. They wanted time to analyze what had already been discovered, to form committees and protocols. Rachel ignored them. Whatever the archive was trying to tell her felt urgent. The structure itself seemed anxious, if that was possible for a crystalline monument to feel. Its responses came faster now, pushing her towards specific files. She focused on the warning sections, the ones that mentioned the catalyst species. With the historical context, she could reconstruct more of the corrupted data. Piece by piece, a picture emerged. The catalyst species appeared before each extinction event. Not as invaders, but as natives. Species that had evolved naturally, achieving spaceflight and joining the galactic community. They seemed normal at first. Friendly, curious, eager to learn. But something about them was fundamentally different from other species. They adapted too quickly, learned too fast, innovated at impossible speeds. Within a few generations, they would leap from primitive spacecraft to technology that rivaled civilizations thousands of years older. They saw patterns others missed, made connections that seemed like magic, solved problems that had stumped the galaxy's greatest minds. Everyone welcomed them at first, celebrated their achievements, learned from them, and then they reached what the archive called the threshold, a point where their technological advancement and philosophical development became unbalanced, where they gained power faster than wisdom. And when they crossed that line, something changed. They began to evolve beyond physical reality itself, not dying but transcending, becoming something the archive's builders couldn't properly describe because they'd never fully understood it. The transcendence process was catastrophic. It destabilized spacetime itself. Entire star systems became unusable, their physical laws too unstable to support life. Billions died not from direct violence but from the collapsing reality around them. And the catalyst species, ascending to whatever they became, either didn't notice or couldn't stop it. Rachel sat back from her screen, feeling sick. The archive wasn't warning about an external threat. It was warning about a type of species, a category of being that repeatedly evolved, repeatedly transcended, and repeatedly left mass death in their wake. "Show me genetic data for the catalyst species," she transmitted. The archive responded immediately. Biological specifications flooded her screen. Genetic markers, neurological structures, physiological traits. Rachel compared them to the databases of known species. No matches. The catalyst species from each cycle had been different from each other. Different biologies, different homeworlds, different evolutionary paths. But they shared certain characteristics. High neural plasticity, unusual problem-solving capabilities, something the archive called adaptation resonance. A quality that let them change their thinking patterns rapidly to match new challenges. Rachel pulled up humanity's own biological data with shaking hands. She ran the comparison. The match wasn't perfect, but it was close. Terrifyingly close. Humanity had the same neural plasticity patterns, the same problem-solving capability markers, the same adaptation resonance signatures. "No," Rachel whispered. "No, that's not possible." But the data didn't lie. Humanity fit the profile, not exactly, but within acceptable variance. And there was more. The archive had been monitoring the galaxy since reactivating. Its sensors detected what it called threshold events, markers that indicated a catalyst species was approaching the danger point. The first threshold event in this cycle had been detected 50 years ago, right when humanity achieved faster-than-light travel. Since then, 3 more threshold events had occurred. Quantum computing, artificial general intelligence, successful consciousness mapping, all human achievements, all within 50 years, all matching the acceleration pattern of previous catalyst species. Rachel wanted to reject it, to find some flaw in the analysis. But she'd spent weeks learning to trust the archive's data. It had been right about everything else. Why would it be wrong about this? "You're saying humanity is the catalyst species," she transmitted. "That we're going to cause the next extinction event. Not saying, showing. Evidence indicates high probability. You asked for truth. Here is truth. Humanity matches profile. Humanity shows acceleration pattern. Humanity approaches threshold. Time remaining is short. How short? Calculations are imprecise. Many variables, but based on current progression and historical patterns, humanity will reach critical threshold within 1 to 5 of your generations. Perhaps sooner if acceleration continues." Rachel looked at the estimated death toll from the last extinction event. Billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. All because one species had evolved too fast and transcended too carelessly. And now the galaxy was staring at the same disaster again. Only this time, Rachel's own species was the threat. She thought about reporting this immediately, raising the alarm. But she knew what would happen: panic, probably violence. Some species would call for humanity's extinction, arguing that billions of future lives mattered more than one species. Others would demand quarantine, locking humanity away from the wider galaxy. And humans themselves would react with fear and defiance. The archive had shown her the problem, but she still needed to understand it fully, because somewhere in these ancient records might be a solution, a way for humanity to avoid repeating history. She had to believe that was possible. Because if it wasn't, if humanity was doomed to become monsters no matter what they did, then what was the point of any of this? "Show me everything," Rachel transmitted. Every detail about the previous catalyst species. How they transcended, what warnings they ignored, everything. Preparing comprehensive files. Warning, information may cause distress. Continue? Yes, I need to know. The data began flowing again, and Rachel forced herself to read every terrible word. Rachel gathered 5 people she trusted into a sealed conference room. 2 were human scientists from the research ship. 3 were alien researchers who'd been working with her for weeks. All of them had signed agreements about classified information. None of them knew why she'd called this meeting. "What I'm about to show you stays in this room until we decide how to handle it," Rachel said. "This is bigger than protocol or politics. This is existential." She activated the display and showed them everything. The extinction cycles, the catalyst species pattern, the biological comparisons, the threshold events, the calculations showing humanity's trajectory. She spoke for 2 hours straight, laying out every piece of evidence the archive had provided. When she finished, nobody spoke for a long time. Finally, Dr. Patterson, one of the human scientists, broke the silence. "You're saying we're the monsters in this story. That humanity is predestined to kill billions of innocent people." "Not predestined," Rachel said. "The archive is clear about that. The previous catalyst species weren't evil. They didn't set out to cause harm. They just developed too fast without understanding the consequences. They gained godlike power before they had the wisdom to use it responsibly." "How is that different from being doomed?" Patterson asked. "If every species like us has caused extinction events, what makes you think we can be different?" One of the alien researchers, a Drayan named Sorath, made a gesture that meant contemplation. "The archive itself is proof that someone believed change was possible. They built this warning system. They documented everything. Why do that if they thought the cycle couldn't be broken?" "Exactly," Rachel said. "The archive was built by survivors of the last extinction. 47 species worked together on it. They could have just hidden from the universe, but they didn't. They created this monument hoping the next cycle would be different." She pulled up another file. The archive's builders left detailed records of their own history with the previous catalyst species. Those beings called themselves the inheritors. They were remarkably similar to humans. Bipedal, social, curious. They invented faster-than-light travel and met the galactic community with enthusiasm. The images showed the inheritors. They looked almost human. Different enough to be clearly alien, but similar enough to be unsettling. Rachel imagined meeting one in a hallway and feeling like she was looking in a distorted mirror. "For 50 years, the inheritors were model galactic citizens," Rachel continued. "They shared their innovations freely. They helped solve problems. They made friends across dozens of species. Everyone loved them. Then they started developing what they called ascension technology, ways to upload consciousness to exist beyond physical form, to reshape reality through pure thought." "Did anyone try to stop them?" Patterson asked. "Many tried to warn them. The Galactic Council of that time held emergency sessions. Scientists explained the risks. But the inheritors didn't believe they were in danger. They thought they were careful, that they understood what they were doing. They ran simulations that showed their ascension process was safe." Rachel pulled up the next file. Her voice went quiet. The simulations were wrong. When the first inheritor achieved transcendence, the effects rippled outward faster than anyone predicted. Within a month, millions of inheritors had ascended. Within a year, their entire species was gone from physical reality, and the damage they left behind killed billions. The images showed empty cities, ships drifting without crews, and then worse things. Star systems where physics had become unstable, planets where gravity fluctuated randomly, space itself cracking like glass in some regions. The survivors had spent thousands of years cleaning up the damage, and some areas still weren't safe. "The inheritors didn't mean to hurt anyone," Rachel said. "In fact, their last transmissions before fully transcending were apologies. They'd realized what was happening but couldn't stop it. They were changing too fast, becoming something that existed partially outside normal space-time. Their very presence was destabilizing reality. She closed that file and opened another. But here's what the archive really wants us to understand. The inheritors weren't the first. The cycle has repeated at least 3 times. Each time, the catalyst species was different. Different biology, different culture, different technologies. But the pattern was the same. Rapid development, boundary-breaking innovation, transcendence, and catastrophe. So what's the solution? Sorath asked. How do we break the pattern? The archive's builders tried to figure that out, Rachel said. They spent centuries studying the problem. They considered many options: containment, forced technological suppression, even preemptive elimination of species that matched the catalyst profile. Everyone in the room looked uncomfortable. The implications were clear. If that was the solution, humanity was already condemned. They rejected all of those approaches, Rachel continued, not because they were squeamish, but because they didn't work. They ran simulations, studied historical data, and concluded that external control would only delay the problem or make it worse, force a catalyst species to stop innovating, and they'd eventually break free and advance even faster out of resentment and fear. She pulled up the final set of files. So they built the archive with a different goal: to warn the next catalyst species about themselves, to show them what would happen if they didn't change course. The archive was designed to only open for a catalyst species. Only they would have the pattern recognition and problem-solving ability to decode its language. And once opened, it would show them the truth. The archive is talking to us, Patterson said slowly, specifically to humanity, because we're the next catalyst species. Yes. And there's something else. Rachel activated a different file, one she'd only translated an hour before the meeting. I found messages from the inheritors, recordings they made while ascending, while they still had enough connection to physical reality to communicate. They were trying to warn whoever came next. The first recording played. The translation came through as text, since the original audio was encoded in ways human ears couldn't process. But the words were clear enough. We didn't know. Nobody told us this could happen. We thought we were being careful. We thought our intelligence was enough to keep us safe. But intelligence without wisdom is just faster ignorance. We solved every problem except the most important one: whether we should do something just because we could. Now we're becoming something new and we can't stop it, and everything we loved is burning. Whoever finds this, whoever comes after us, please learn from our mistake. Your mind is powerful, but power without restraint is poison. We're sorry. We're so sorry. Forgive us. Forgive yourself. The room was silent again. Rachel saw tears on Patterson's face. Sorath had gone very still, the way Drayan did when processing difficult emotions. The other recordings say similar things, Rachel said quietly. The inheritors knew they'd failed. They spent their last moments trying to help the next cycle avoid their fate, and the archive's builders preserved those messages, hoping they'd matter. Do they matter? Patterson asked. Can we actually do anything different? I don't know, Rachel admitted, but I think we have to try. Because the alternative is accepting that humanity is destined to kill billions and there's nothing we can do about it. I can't accept that. I won't, so what do we do? Sorath asked. Rachel pulled up her proposal. She'd been working on it for 3 days, ever since she'd understood what the archive was trying to tell her. We tell the truth, all of it. To humanity, to the Galactic Council, to everyone. Complete transparency. Then we build a new system, not to suppress human innovation, but to make sure every advancement is evaluated for existential risk. A partnership between humanity and other species, where we check each other, teach each other, and make sure we don't repeat the inheritors' mistakes. The Council will never accept that, Patterson said. Some species will demand we be quarantined or eliminated, and humans will panic when they learn they're supposedly destined to destroy the galaxy. Probably, Rachel agreed, but hiding this information guarantees failure. The inheritors kept their ascension research secret because they were afraid others would steal it. That secrecy meant nobody could warn them properly when things went wrong. We have to do better. She looked around the room at each person. This is going to be hard. Maybe impossible. But we have something the previous catalyst species didn't. We have their story. We can see what happened to them and choose differently. That has to count for something. They talked for hours after that, planning how to break the news, who to tell first, how to frame it. Eventually, they agreed on a strategy. Rachel would present everything to the Galactic Council, holding nothing back. Simultaneously, human governments would be briefed. The archive's complete records would be made available to anyone who wanted to study them. It would cause chaos. But at least it would be honest chaos. And somewhere in that honesty, Rachel hoped, humanity would find a way to be better than their predecessors. Because the alternative was too terrible to accept. The galactic community fractured within 24 hours of Rachel's announcement. She'd stood before the council and laid out everything, holding nothing back. The archive's warnings, humanity's match to the catalyst profile, the extinction cycles, all of it. She'd expected backlash. What she got was worse than she'd imagined. 12 species immediately called for humanity's quarantine. They wanted all human worlds isolated. No contact with the wider galaxy until the threat could be properly assessed. 5 species went further, arguing that billions of future lives outweighed one species' right to exist. Better to prevent the catastrophe now than wait and hope. Humanity's response was equally divided. Some called Rachel a traitor for revealing information that put her entire species at risk. Others praised her honesty, but demanded Earth withdraw from galactic affairs entirely, refusing to be judged for crimes they hadn't committed yet. Protests erupted on a dozen human colonies. Ships headed back toward Earth, carrying people who wanted to go home before everything collapsed. The moderate voices got drowned out in all the noise. Those who suggested waiting, studying, finding solutions through cooperation were ignored by both extremes. Rachel watched it all from the research ship, feeling responsible for the chaos. She'd known it would be bad. She just hadn't understood how bad. On the 5th day after her announcement, the archive contacted her directly. It had never initiated communication before, always waited for her to reach out first. The fact that it was breaking that pattern meant something important was happening. New data discovered, the archive transmitted. Hidden files, encrypted beyond standard security, required your species profile to unlock. Revealing now, Rachel scrambled to her workstation. New sections of the archive were opening, areas she'd never accessed before. The files inside were heavily encoded, layered with security that had kept them hidden even from her previous deep searches. But now they were readable. The first file was a message. Not from the archive's builders, but from the inheritors themselves. The previous catalyst species. They'd left something behind, buried deep enough that only the next catalyst species could find it. Only someone with the same pattern recognition abilities and problem-solving approach could decode it. If you're reading this, you're like us, the message began. You're the next cycle, and you're probably terrified because you've seen what we did, what we became. The archive showed you the destruction and you're wondering if you're doomed to repeat it. We wondered the same thing while we were transcending, while we were losing ourselves to something we didn't understand. So we left this, a message that only you could read, a truth that the archive's builders never knew. Rachel's hands shook as she kept reading. The builders thought we transcended by accident, that we pushed too far too fast without meaning to, but that's not exactly true. We knew the risks. We'd been warned. Though not as clearly as you're being warned now. We saw the danger and we chose to proceed anyway. Why? Because we thought we were different, special, smart enough to avoid the mistakes of the past. We believed in our own exceptionalism right up until it destroyed us. The next section detailed the inheritors' final months. Their transcendence hadn't been a sudden accident. It had been a deliberate choice, a calculated risk they'd convinced themselves was manageable. They'd developed the technology, run the simulations, and decided the potential benefits outweighed the dangers. Some had argued for caution, for waiting, for more testing. They'd been overruled by those who were confident in their control. We weren't stupid, the message continued. We were arrogant, and arrogance killed billions. So here's what we learned too late. You're not doomed to transcend. You have a choice. But making that choice requires something incredibly difficult. You have to accept limitation. You have to admit that some doors shouldn't be opened, not because you can't, but because you shouldn't. Your species' greatest gift is your adaptability, your drive to push boundaries. That's what makes you catalyst material. But it's also what will kill you if you can't learn to channel it differently. Rachel read faster, desperate to see what came next. The inheritors had left detailed notes about their transcendence process, how it started, how it accelerated, what warning signs they'd ignored. But more importantly, they'd left analysis about how it could have been prevented. The technology isn't the problem, they explained. Any sufficiently advanced species can develop transcendence methods. The problem is isolation. We worked in secret, convinced we knew better than everyone else. When people warned us, we dismissed them as scared of progress. When our own people expressed doubts, we called them cowards. We refused to truly listen to perspectives different from our own. That isolation meant nobody could stop us when we were wrong. The last part of the message hit Rachel like cold water. The archives. Builders thought they could prevent future cycles by warning the next catalyst species. That's part of the solution, but not all of it. They included something else in the archive, something we discovered while transcending, a governor protocol, a piece of technology that could limit your species' rate of innovation, slow you down artificially so you'd never reach the critical threshold. They planned to offer it to you as a solution. Don't accept it, the message emphasized. The governor protocol is a test. The archive's builders put it there to see if you'd choose self-limitation, if you would voluntarily cripple your own greatest strength out of fear. If you accepted, it would mean you'd learned nothing from our mistake. We failed because we wouldn't accept outside input, because we isolated ourselves. The governor protocol would do the same thing, just in reverse. It would make you dependent on external control, afraid of your own nature. That's not wisdom. That's just different arrogance. Rachel sat back, her mind racing. She pulled up the archive's deeper systems and searched for this governor protocol. She found it exactly where the inheritors said it would be. A sophisticated piece of technology that could be integrated into human neural interfaces, into artificial intelligence systems, into the very fabric of human innovation. It would make them slower, more careful, more controlled, safer, and completely wrong. She transmitted to the archive directly. Why didn't you tell me about the governor protocol? The archive's response came slowly, like it was considering its words carefully. The inheritors requested it remain hidden until after you found their message. They believed you needed to understand the full context. They were correct. What is your decision? My decision about what? Whether to accept the governor protocol, whether to choose safety through limitation. Rachel thought about everything she'd learned. The inheritors had failed because they refused outside input, because they convinced themselves they were special enough to ignore warnings. But the solution wasn't to become helpless, to cripple humanity's ability to innovate. That would just trade one problem for another. I reject the governor protocol, Rachel said. It's the wrong answer. Explain. The inheritors failed because they isolated themselves. They thought they alone could handle the power they were developing. But the solution isn't isolation in the opposite direction. It's cooperation. Partnership. Building systems where we share dangerous knowledge, where multiple perspectives evaluate risks, where no one species makes existential decisions alone. This is correct answer, the archive responded. The inheritors understood at the end. They left their message hoping next cycle would see the truth. You have. Question remains, can you implement what you understand? Rachel knew what needed to happen. She composed a message to the Galactic Council, to human leadership, to everyone who was scared and angry and demanding simple solutions. I've discovered new information from the archive, she wrote. The previous catalyst species left us a message and a choice. They offered us a way to artificially limit human innovation, to slow us down so we'd never reach dangerous thresholds. I'm rejecting that option. Not because I'm arrogant enough to think humans can handle this alone, but because I'm wise enough to know we can't. She detailed her proposal. A new archive, a living one maintained by all species, a place where dangerous innovations would be shared and evaluated collectively. A council with real power, where humans and aliens work together to assess existential risks. Full transparency about research, open debate about advancement, and most importantly, the humility to accept that sometimes the answer would be not yet or even no. The inheritors failed because they wouldn't listen to anyone else, Rachel wrote. We'll succeed by making sure we always do. This won't be easy. It requires trust from species who have every reason to fear us. It requires humans accepting oversight and limitation. It requires building something new together. But it's the only way forward that doesn't end in extinction or stagnation. She sent the message knowing it would be controversial. Many would call her naive. Some would accuse her of giving up human sovereignty. Others would say it wasn't enough, that humanity still posed too great a risk. But as Rachel looked at the archive's consciousness data, at the final words of the inheritors, she felt something like hope. They'd failed. They'd killed billions and lost themselves to transcendence. But they'd learned something in their final moments. Something important enough that they'd encoded it into the deepest parts of the archive, where only the next cycle could find it. The lesson was simple. Power without wisdom was deadly, but wisdom meant knowing when to share power with others. Humanity's gift was adaptation. Time to adapt in a way no previous catalyst species had managed. Time to choose cooperation over isolation, humility over arrogance, partnership over pride. The archive had warned them about themselves. Now they had to prove they could be different. 5 years later, Rachel stood in front of a structure that hadn't existed before humanity learned the truth about itself. The new archive rose from the surface of a neutral moon, built with technology from 17 different species. It looked nothing like the ancient crystalline monument that still floated in deep space. This one was designed to be accessible, transparent, alive with activity. Ships came and went constantly. Scientists, philosophers, ethicists, and politicians from across the galaxy gathered here to debate the future. Human innovations were shared openly, examined from every angle, tested for risks nobody had considered. In return, alien species shared their own dangerous research, their own ethical dilemmas, their own fears about what progress might cost. It hadn't been easy to build. The first year after Rachel's announcement had been chaos. Protests, diplomatic incidents, 3 human colonies declaring independence because they refused oversight. The Torvan Empire had pulled out of the Galactic Council entirely for 8 months. Several species had demanded impossible guarantees that humans couldn't provide. But slowly, painfully, something new had emerged. The Threshold Council started as a small group of volunteers. Rachel, Sorath, Patterson, and representatives from 6 other species willing to take the risk. They established simple rules. Any research that could affect more than one world had to be disclosed. Any technology with existential implications would be evaluated collectively. Any species, human or otherwise, could raise concerns about dangerous advancement. The first test came 18 months after the council formed. A human research team on Nova Terra developed a breakthrough in quantum consciousness mapping, the kind of technology that had been one of the inheritors' final steps before transcendence. Under the old system, it would have been kept secret until ready for deployment. Under the new system, the researchers brought it to the Threshold Council immediately. Rachel remembered that debate. It had lasted 3 weeks. Human scientists explained the benefits, treating mental illness, backing up memories, extending consciousness beyond biological death. Alien ethicists pointed out the risks. The technology was only 2 steps away from the ascension methods that had destroyed the inheritors. If humanity jumped to consciousness uploading too quickly, they might trigger the same cascade. The council's decision shocked everyone. They approved the research, but with conditions. The work would continue at half speed, with a mandatory ethics review after each advancement. Alien scientists would be embedded in the research team to provide outside perspectives, and if at any point 3 council members from 3 different species called for a halt, the work would stop until concerns could be addressed. Some humans called it insulting. Some aliens said it wasn't restrictive enough, but the research team accepted the terms. They understood what was at stake. 4 years later, that same research had produced treatments for 17 different neural conditions, and it had stayed firmly in the realm of therapy, never approaching the dangerous territory of consciousness uploading, because the embedded alien scientists had spotted warning signs the human team missed. Because the outside perspective had caught problems before they became catastrophic. That success had convinced more species to join the Threshold Council, more to trust that the system could work. The council now included representatives from 43 species. Still not universal participation, but growing. Rachel entered the new archive building and headed to her office. She'd been appointed as permanent director 3 years ago, though she still thought of herself as just a translator, trying to prevent catastrophe. Her walls were covered with communications from around the galaxy. Thank you messages from species who felt safer knowing humanity was being watched. Angry letters from humans who thought she'd betrayed her own kind. Progress reports from research teams working under council oversight, and in the center of it all, a communication terminal directly linked to the ancient archive. The original structure had become part of the new system, its vast database accessible to anyone who wanted to learn from history. Rachel still talked to it sometimes, especially when things got difficult. "How are we doing?" she transmitted to the ancient consciousness. The response came quickly. The archive had become more talkative over the years, less cryptic. Maybe it was relieved to finally have its warning heard and acted upon. Better than inheritors at equivalent point. You have achieved 4 threshold events without cascade. This is unprecedented, but danger remains. Current human research into dimensional physics shows pattern similarities to previous cycle. Recommend increased scrutiny. Rachel made a note to bring up dimensional physics at the next council meeting. This was how it worked now. Constant vigilance, constant communication, constant checking. It was exhausting, but it was working. She pulled up the latest reports from human space. Faster-than-light communication had been perfected last year, making coordination easier. New colonies were being established, each one registered with the galactic community and open to alien observers. Human art and culture were spreading across the galaxy, mixing with alien influences to create something neither fully human nor fully alien. And most importantly, humanity was still human, still innovating, still pushing boundaries, still dreaming of tomorrow. The oversight hadn't killed that spark. It had just made sure the spark didn't become a wildfire that consumed everything. A message popped up on Rachel's screen. Dr. Patterson, now leading a research facility on Earth, had sent his monthly update. His team was working on something they called consciousness preservation, a way to maintain human neural patterns after death. Not uploading or transcendence, just storage, like a library of human thought. We think we've got something, Patterson wrote, but it's adjacent to dangerous territory. Bringing it to the council before we go further. Schedule us for next month's review. Rachel smiled and approved the request. This was what success looked like. Not humans avoiding all risk, but humans sharing risk and working with others to navigate it safely. The council would examine Patterson's work, ask hard questions, maybe slow it down or redirect it. And Patterson would accept that because he understood what was at stake. She thought about the inheritors often, about how they'd been at this exact point once right before everything went wrong. They'd had the power, the intelligence, the capability to do amazing things. They'd lacked only the wisdom to ask for help. That single failure had killed billions and erased them from physical existence. Rachel refused to let humanity make the same mistake. Even when it was hard. Even when people called her a traitor or a coward. Even when she lay awake at night wondering if she'd made the right choices. A chime indicated an incoming transmission from deep space. The old archive was sending something new. After 5 years of cooperation, it still occasionally found hidden files worth sharing. Rachel opened the transmission and saw it was another message from the inheritors. They'd left dozens scattered throughout the archive systems, each one revealing itself when certain conditions were met. This one was short. Just a few sentences. If you're reading this, enough time has passed that you've made progress. You haven't transcended yet, which means you're doing better than we did. We were arrogant enough to think we could handle everything alone. If you've survived this long, it means you were smart enough to accept help. That's good. That's what we should have done. Keep going. You can make it, and if you do, remember us not as monsters, but as people who made mistakes and tried to warn you. That's all anyone can do. Rachel saved the message and added it to the public archive. The inheritors' words were part of the new system. Their failures, their warnings, their final attempts at redemption, all of it available for anyone to study and learn from. She looked out her office window at the ships coming and going. Human vessels mixed with alien ones, all working together. Scientists collaborating across species lines. Politicians arguing about policy rather than existence. Children growing up in a galaxy where humanity wasn't feared as harbingers of extinction, but accepted as partners who'd chosen wisdom over arrogance. The danger wasn't gone. Humanity was still a catalyst species. They still had the capacity to cause catastrophe if they pushed too far too fast. But they also had something the inheritors never had. A galactic community willing to help them navigate their own nature. And the humility to accept that help. Rachel's tablet chimed with the schedule for next month's council meeting. 17 items on the agenda, including Patterson's consciousness preservation research, a Drayan proposal about artificial gravity, and something the aliens wanted to discuss about time dilation experiments. All potentially dangerous, all being handled openly and collectively. She approved the schedule and sent it out. Tomorrow she'd review the research proposals. Next week she'd mediate a dispute about resource allocation. Next month she'd testify before the Galactic Council about humanity's progress and remaining risks. The work never ended, but it was working. 5 years without catastrophe. 5 years of progress with safety. 5 years proving that the cycle could be broken. Rachel transmitted one final message to the ancient archive before leaving for the day. Thank you for the warning. We're listening. We're learning. We're trying to be better. The archive's response was simple but warm, as close to pride as an ancient consciousness could express. I know that is why I chose to speak. Continue forward. Remember the past. Build better future. This is the way. Rachel smiled and headed home. Tomorrow she'd start again, working to keep humanity safe from itself while letting them remain themselves. It was exhausting work. Important work. And for the first time in nearly 1,000,000 years, the galaxy's oldest archive had hope that this time, the ending might be different. The inheritors had warned them. They'd learned from the warning. And now they were building something new. Not perfect, but better. Not safe, but safer. Not the end of the story, but maybe finally the beginning of a good one.